Welcome to 20th Century Music and Arts. In some of my previous episodes, I've looked at things like British post-punk and the American underground of the 1980s. Now in this episode, I'm going to look at the fruition of those influences that happened in the late 80s and early 90s, with the bands that were really progressing the music using dissonant guitars, odd time signatures, and were playing around with a lot of different concepts of distortion. During that period from the late 1980s to the mid-1990s, which my friend Burn Power refers to as the postmodern period of rock, so many bands in the underground were pushing the parameters of the rock genre and far away from the standard blues-based rock. I have selected 20 standout albums from this time period. Some of the choices are very well known, others are a bit more rare. I've limited my choices to one album per band, and the sounds range from post-hardcore to indie rock to noise rock to math rock. I mean, trying to figure out where the boundaries of these categories end and begin is difficult. And as Elvis Costello states, they should really be seen as signposts to gauge where a sound is, rather than being a hard definition. I also limited my choices again to one album per artist in order to help people get more exposure to these different groups. The first one on my list, and again, this is not going to be in any chronological order. These are just 20 really great albums from this time period. And that first one on my list is by Fugazi. Now, you got to remember, during the late 80s and through the 90s, Fugazi was seen as the archetypal band for demonstrating a kind of indie integrity. The band controlled the means of production through their label Discord, where they were able to control the prices of records and even concert tickets. So they felt the fans were not getting gouged financially by some of the people in the music industry. The band's sound was based on this idea that Ian MacKaye have of fusing reggae and the old proto-punk band The Stooges and fusing those sounds together. The band has an intense rhythmic sound that plays around with like staccato riffs, feedbacks, and it's got these disciplined stops and starts that often leave really uncomfortable spaces in between. I could choose any of the albums by Fugazi for this list, but I'm going to choose 1991's Steady Diet of Nothing. While this album is less of an onslaught than its predecessor Repeater, it contains a completely cerebral approach to rock, where feedback is used actually rhythmically. Highlight tracks include Exit Only, Reclamation, Latin Roots, Steady Diet, Runaway Return, and KYEO. This album is a great place to start for those who want to become familiar with Fugazi. The next band on our list is the mighty The Jesus Lizard. A band that took the chaos of the Birthday Party and fused it with the precision of King Crimson and the muscular rhythms of Led Zeppelin. David Yao sings over this sound with muffled yells, and during live shows he would fling himself into the audience while still singing and holding the mic. The album I'm going to choose by them is Liar from 1992. This album just starts strong right from the beginning, and the combination of precision and anarchy is fantastic. Highlight tracks include Boilermaker, The Art of Self-Defense, Puss, and Dancing Naked Ladies. I would argue that this album is the band's strongest, and it's definitely, in my opinion, the most intense. Now, the next band on this list is less well known than the previous two. Based out of Framingham, Massachusetts, Green Magnet School created a unique sound by having 3 guitars playing simultaneously. With this approach, they were able to create layers and textures of sound using feedback, and while the other 2 guitars might play different rhythms. Their 1991 album Blood Music is absolutely fantastic. Highlight tracks include Ellipses, Throb, Package, and Windshield. This album and band should be more widely known and should be really referenced when discussing great noise rock bands. The next album has precision, passion, chaos, and intensity, and that is 1994's Yank Crime by Drive Like Jehu. The band would forge a sound here that would be highly influential on post-hardcore and emo-core bands in the 90s and 2000s. Let's face it, there would be no At the Drive-In without Drive Like Jehu. The sound is reckless abandon with mathematical complexity, and the result is absolutely awesome. Highlights include Here Come the Rome Plows, Do You Compute, New Math, and the 9-minute long Sinews. This album is an essential listen for those who want to understand the progression of rock in the 1990s. The next album is a bit of an anomaly compared with the rest because this band was long established by the time of its release of this album and could have belonged on my top 10 albums of the 80s underground. The album is 1989's Wrong by No Means No, out of Victoria, Canada. While the band had been making music again since the early 80s, with this album they play a kind of mathematical hardcore punk that is as ferocious as any hardcore band and as technical as any jazz fusion band, and it drips with the sarcasm of something like Frank Zappa. And man, you have never heard bass playing like this before. Highlight tracks include It's Catching Up, Tired of Waiting, Two Lips, Two Lungs, and One Tongue, Rags and Bones, and All Lies. Please check out this fantastic album. The next album on the list is Kill Atom Smasher by Pitchblende from 1993. This four-piece are from Washington, D.C., and they take the influence of Mission and Burma and add more arty noise and prog rock complexity to the sound. This lesser-known album is a great artifact of what was going on in the early 90s in the American underground. Highlight tracks include Red Cap, Flax, Sawed Off City, Visceral Place, Disco Skull, and La Cure Box. Please check out this lesser known album. It's really great. The next band on the list, an example of a band who are pioneers of the sound that is heard in many of the other bands on this list. And that band is Bitch Magnet. And the album is 1989's Umber, their first full-length album. The band takes cues from Steve Albini's band Big Black, who produced their first EP and their second LP, but not Umber. But they have more dynamics, particularly quiet moments contrasted with loud outbursts. They have oft-time sounds that oft go along with these full-on rock riffs. Singer Soo Young Park has times where his voice is almost whispered, and other times it is a passionate yell. This band's sound would be massively influential on indie rock, noise rock, and math rock in the 90s. But unfortunately, the band would break up in 1991, the year Nirvana broke through. Highlights from the album include Navajo Ace, Clay, Douglas Leader, Joyless Street, and Americruiser. Please check out the work of these underground pioneers who never really got the credit they deserve. Another band who were influential and way ahead of their time, but in retrospect have actually been given a lot of recognition, is the band Slint. And the album I've chose is of course 1991's Spiderland. This album would have a massive influence on the post-rock genre. The band played this subdued dynamic noise music that at times is simple and other times it's very complex, with these spoken vocals detached that are very odd. It's kind of similar to Bitch Magnet, but it's definitely a bit more subdued. The sound here is unbelievably unique, and you have to really hear it to get the essence of it. I can't really describe it in words. They kind of jam on riffs and allow the tension to build up, but often it's in a very quiet manner with strange dialogue like lyrics. Highlights include Breadcrumb Trail, Nosferatu Man, Washer, and Good Morning Captain. This album is essential for those who want to understand how music evolved in the 90s. Choosing one album from the incredible band Unwound I knew would be difficult, but I had to go with The Future of What from 1995. This album marks the transition from their more punk rock, hardcore sound of the earlier albums to the more experimental approach of the later album. The band opened for both Fugazi and Sonic Youth, and they kind of have elements of both those bands in their sound, but they have this kind of unique intensity that goes along. It's got a kind of arty approach, and they also mix these strange soundscapes between the main tracks of the album. Highlight tracks include New Energy, Demolished, Reenact the Crime, Dissension, Accidents on Purpose, and Petals Like Bricks. I would recommend getting all the albums by this band. Next on the list is the 1994 album by the band Rodan entitled Rusty. This album contains the quiet beauty found in bands like Slint and at times Bitch Magnet, but there's guitar complexity that is allowed to build up and eventually crescendo. But other tracks are like full-on aggressive noise rock, but again with a kind of math rock complexity. And then some tracks are kind of like a combination of the two. The vocals are definitely more intense and kind of rageful than Slint, and there's definitely a King Crimson influence going on here. Highlight tracks include Bible, Silver Corner, The Everyday World of Bodies, Jungle Gym, and Gauge. You really need to check out the only full-length studio album by this band. Steve Albini's band in the 1990s, Shellac, produced an absolute masterpiece in 1994 called At Action Park. No longer playing with a drum machine, but like he was in Big Black, he was now backed up by a real live drummer and a bass player. And the band brings an intense dynamic and kind of nasty sound, and it's full of Albini's scathing irony. The band creates these off-time dynamics that seem so out of whack, yet they work and make sense rhythmically. The tension is built, but sometimes there is actually no release to it. Highlight tracks include Pull the Cup, Crow, A Minute, A Dog and Pony Show. It is tragic that we lost Steve Albini this year. He was such an incredible musician and producer who worked with actually quite a few bands on this list. Choosing a single album by Polvo was going to be difficult, but I am actually going to choose their EP from 1994, Celebrate the New Dark Age. The band uses out-of-tune guitars to sculpt their sound in the manner of Sonic Youth, but they take that sound definitely in their own direction. They create these kind of obtuse rhythms that bypass the shimmering sound of Sonic Youth and create something much more disjointed with a kind of nerdy irony. The strangely tuned guitars almost sound Middle Eastern at times, but that's probably not on purpose. Highlight tracks include Fractured Like Chandeliers, Tragic Carpet Ride, Solitary Set, and Every Holy Shroud. Polvo certainly create some unique sound worlds, and all their work is definitely worth exploring. Now it is time to get completely beaten over the head with another album from 1994. What a great year for music that was. And that album is Into the Vortex by the band Hammerhead. This album was on the label Amphetamine Reptile, a label that specialized in ugly noise rock, and this album does not disappoint. But the noise here is, while it is aggressive, it's disciplined. And it also kind of like fully rocks at times. Don't worry, there's no ballads here. And the sound here definitely connects with another Midwestern noise band, Killdozer. But Hammerhead's sound is darker and more brutal. Highlight tracks include Swallow, All Is Yours, Breast, Double Negative, and Galaxy 66. Please check out these Minneapolis noisemakers. For the next album, we are going to my hometown of Toronto and look at 1993 album Yared Fair Scratch by a band called Flag Camp. Unfortunately, this album is out of print, but somebody has put it up on YouTube, so really check it out. The three-piece create a very interesting dynamics. Flag Camp play a sound, it's not incredibly distorted, but the complexity of the rhythms create incredible kind of dynamic tension in the sound. I saw these guys open for the Rollins Band in 1992, and they really got the crowd going with their really intense rhythms. The album was produced by Steve Albini, and highlights include Red Rocket's Glare, Big Pocket Pretender, and Desk Star Looney. It is a shame that this band, Flag Camp, is not more widely known. Another less known band was Circus Lupus out of Washington, D.C., and they were on the Discord label. And the album I have chosen is their 1992 album, Super Genius. People have described their sound as The Fall meets Fugazi meets Jesus Lizard, but it's kind of looser than any of those bands. It's like running through a swamp with a dose of kind of blues rock. Singer Chris Thompson comes across as a kind of post-hardcore version of Marquis Smith. Highlights include Pacifier, Straight Through the Heart, Mean, Hot, and Blessed, and the track Pulp. Please get to know this lesser-known DC band. Another great DC band is Girls Against Boys, and for this list we are going to include their 1993 album Venus Luxure No. 7. With two bass players and a guitarist and a drummer, this band create a unique driving sound with rough but kind of suave vocals of Scott McCloud. It is noisy at times, but it's hip and stylish, but not in a way that's cliched at all. The two basses create a thicker sound, allowing the guitarist to kind of dabble in the noise. The sound here is definitely more smooth than the kind of obtuse dynamics of the other bands that are on this list. Highlight tracks include In Like Flynn, Rockets Are Red, Let Me Come Back, Bulletproof Cupid, Seven Seas, and Billy's One Stop. This is probably one of the more approachable bands on the list, and it would be actually less challenging for your friends to get into Girls Against Boys than some of the other bands. The next band is kind of like a strange offspring of kind of like visually Devo, and sound-wise it's kind of like Gang of Four and post-hardcore and a blender. And of course I'm referring to Six Finger Satellite, and the album is their debut, The Pigeon is the Most Popular Bird, and it's on Sub Pop out of Seattle. It was released in 1993. Noisy but sparse and off-time dynamics fill this album, and the rhythms are obtuse, and it gets really crazy sounding at times. And there's like these strange short tracks that are spaced between the main songs, giving the album a kind of surreal quality. But some of the tracks groove in a really odd way. But the sound here is dry, but I mean that in a good way. It's very unique. You really got to hear this album. Again, a very odd album, but worth checking out. Highlight tracks include Home for the Holiday, Laughing Larry, Solitary Hero, Neuroharmonic Conspiracy, and Takes One to Know One. Please get to know this really odd band. Did you realize that Fred Armisen, yes, from Saturday Night Live, was in a crazy post-hardcore band? He played drums for Trenchmouth. And the album I'm going to choose from out of their albums is their 1994 album, Trenchmouth versus The Light of the Sun. Now, this is some wild stuff. This album combines jazz, like I'm talking free jazz chaos, with the intensity of hardcore. It does not really let up very much, and the vocals kind of follow the chaotic rhythms, and it puts this whole new spin on the concept of melody. It's really odd. It's kind of like if Pere Ubu became a hardcore band, and there's sections where there's a little bit of dub influence experimented with, but it all ends up in this kind of jazz influence madness. Yeah, this might be the most challenging album on the list. Highlight tracks include Washington, Washington, How I Became Invincible, The Effects of Radiations, and Bricks Should Have Wings. This album is just beautiful chaos at its finest. Now, the next album is Pure Punishment. And that album is Total Destruction by Unsane. There are no quirky rhythms here, just audio brutality. Though the album was released through Matador, it got distribution through Atlantic Records, and it was released in January of 1994. The three-piece create a pulsating low-end attack that never really gives up. It's like a noise rock that flirts with the ugliness of metal and kind of has connections with the Melvins, but it's meaner sounding than that. The video for Body Bomb got banned from MTV because it showed a man making a bomb and then he blows up a building with people in it. Highlight tracks include, of course, Body Bomb, Straight, Dispatched, and 455. Check out this brutal noise rock at its best. The final album on the list and is one that's actually a major label album. I'm talking about Slip by Quicksand. This album takes the influence of Fugazi and Helmet, and they put their own unique spin on the sounds of those bands. With a volume that's up like an alternative metal album. It's much bigger sounding than the other albums on this list. And the members of the bands were veterans from the New York hardcore scene, from bands like Gorilla Biscuits. And, the dynamics that Quicksand create, would be influential on the hardcore scene in the 90s and how those bands progressed. What is so great about this album is the passion in the sound. And it's got this vibe, that kind of angry, positive vibe that can fire you up and, keep you going when life can be overwhelming. Highlight tracks include Phaser, Head to Wall, Unfulfilled, and there's this amazing cover of the Smiths song How Soon Is Now. This is an example, one of the few I've ever seen, of a band going on a major label and totally keeping their edge. The musical scenes associated with these bands were incredible, and that time period for me is sorely missed. There were so many unique bands on this list that experimented and forged their own sound. Please check out all the bands on the list. This time period was really kind of rock's last stand. It seemed like only once we get past 95, 96, people start more going to raves and getting into hip hop, and a lot of this kind of music died out. But all of these bands should be really more widely known and appreciated. Thank you for watching 20th Century Music and Arts. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Do you have a favorite album from this list, or a favorite band from this list, or maybe another band? Thank you.